I found the first marker on the Tuesday morning in late October, 15 feet inside what I knew was my property line. The iron pin was still there. You could see where someone had dug it up and moved it. Fresh dirt, grass not yet grown back, the kind of amateur job that tells you someone thought they were being clever but didn't understand that property surveys are a matter of public record. The second marker was 20 feet off. The third was 18 feet. Someone had systematically moved my entire western boundary line, shrinking my 42 acres by almost 3 acres of prime pasture land. Land I'd been paying taxes on for 17 years. Land my horses grazed on every summer. I stood there in my work boots, surveying the obvious tampering, and did what I always do when someone makes a mistake. I gave them a chance to fix it before I fixed it for them. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 51 years old. I've owned this property in western Wyoming since 2007. Before that, I spent 23 years as a civil engineer specializing in land surveying and boundary disputes. I know exactly how property law works, what constitutes boundary encroachment, and what happens when someone intentionally moves survey markers. It's a felony. Class D felony in Wyoming, specifically. But we'd get to that later. First, I needed to confirm what I already knew. I drove into town, stopped at the county clerk's office, and pulled my original 2007 survey. Then I pulled the survey for the property west of mine, the 60-acre parcel that Riverbend Estates Homeowners Association had purchased 3 years ago and subdivided into 12 luxury estate lots. The surveys matched. My western boundary was exactly where my grandfather's iron pins had been placed in 1958, confirmed by my 2007 survey, and clearly marked on every county map. Someone from Riverbend Estates had moved my markers to steal 3 acres of my land. I made copies, paid for certified versions with county seals. Then I drove to the hardware store and bought 12 pieces of rebar, 2 cans of bright orange spray paint, and a 3-pound sledgehammer. Back home, I walked my entire western boundary line using the survey measurements and my old transit level from my engineering days. Every 50 feet, I drove a piece of rebar into the ground exactly on my legal property line and painted the top bright orange. 12 markers. Unmistakable. Properly placed according to recorded surveys. Then I took photographs of every marker, time-stamped them, and filed them with GPS coordinates. Documentation. Always document everything. That evening, I sent a certified letter to the Riverbend Estates HOA president, a man named Douglas Kerr who'd made his money in real estate development and apparently thought that gave him the authority to redraw property lines. The letter was simple. Mr. Kerr, I have discovered that survey markers on my western property boundary have been moved approximately 15 to 20 feet onto my land. This appears to be an attempt to encroach on my legally surveyed property. I have reinstalled proper boundary markers according to the 1958 original survey and my 2007 certified survey, both on file with the county. Any fencing, construction, or improvements on my property side of these markers must be removed within 30 days. If you have questions about the boundary location, I'm happy to meet with you and the original surveyor. Robert Chen, professional, calm, giving him a chance to acknowledge the mistake and fix it. I should have known better. Douglas's response came by email 3 days later, not even certified mail email. Bob, we've had our own survey done of the boundary between Riverbend Estates and your property. Our surveyor's findings differ from your claimed boundary line. The HOA's position is that the current fence line represents the actual legal boundary based on adverse possession and historical use. We will not be removing any improvements on what we consider HOA property. If you continue to contest this, please direct your attorney to contact our legal counsel. Douglas Kerr, President, Riverbend Estates HOA. I read it twice. Then I pulled out my survey law textbooks from college just to make sure I remembered correctly. Adverse possession in Wyoming requires 20 years of continuous, open, notorious, and hostile use. The HOA had existed for 3 years. They didn't have a legal leg to stand on. But Douglas had made 3 mistakes in that email. First, he'd called me Bob. My name is Robert. I've never gone by Bob. It's a small thing, but it shows he didn't take me seriously. Second, he'd claimed they had their own survey but didn't provide it. That meant either they didn't actually have one or their surveyor had told them they were wrong and they were bluffing. Third, he'd threatened lawyers, which meant he thought I'd back down rather than spend money on legal fees. I spent that evening doing research, not on property law. I already knew that cold. On the Riverbend Estates subdivision itself, turned out they had a problem. A significant problem. The subdivision plat filed with the county showed very specific setback requirements. All structures had to be at least 50 feet from property boundaries. It was designed to prevent exactly the kind of boundary disputes they were now creating. But if my property line was where I said it was, where it legally was, then 3 of the newly built homes in Riverbend Estates had violated those setbacks. One house had a deck that extended to within 38 feet of my boundary. Another had a shed at 42 feet. A third had a landscaped patio at 45 feet. If they acknowledged the real property line, those violations would need to be corrected. Expensive corrections. Permits would be challenged. Property values would be affected. So Douglas had moved my markers, hoping I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care enough to fight about it. Hoping he could establish a new boundary before anyone checked the actual surveys. He'd made a bad bet. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't need one yet. Instead, I hired something more useful, the original surveying firm that had done my 2007 survey. They'd been in business since 1972, and their reputation was spotless. I paid them $2,800 to do a complete resurvey of my western boundary, with particular attention to documenting the original 1958 iron pins and showing exactly where someone had attempted to move them. The surveyor, a man in his 60s named Jim Walsh, spent 2 days on the job. When he was done, he called me over to his truck. "Robert, I've been doing this for 40 years. I've seen property disputes, sloppy work, honest mistakes. This isn't any of those. Someone deliberately moved your markers. They didn't just move them randomly. They moved them in a consistent pattern designed to steal almost exactly 3 acres. Can you document that?" "Already did. I've got photographs, measurements, soil disturbance analysis. I can testify that these pins were moved within the last 6 months based on ground settlement and vegetation patterns." "And the legal boundary?" "Exactly where your original survey says it is. No question. No ambiguity. Your orange rebar markers are within 2 inches of the true legal line." He handed me a USB drive. Full report, photographs, surveyor's certification, legal description. "You want to take this to court? I'll testify." "No charge for that. I don't like people who mess with survey markers." I thanked him. Then I had him send certified copies of his report to Douglas Kerr, the Riverbend HOA Board, and the County Planning Department. That's when things got interesting. The County Planning Director called me 2 days later. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and she'd been dealing with Riverbend Estates since they started developing. "Mr. Chen, I've reviewed the survey report. This is concerning. If your boundary line is correct and based on county records, it appears to be several structures in the Riverbend development are in violation of their approved setbacks." "I know. I pulled the subdivision plat. I'm required to send violation notices to the affected property owners. This is going to create problems for the HOA. That's their problem, not mine. They moved my property markers. Do you have evidence of that?" I sent her Jim Walsh's photographs showing the disturbed earth and displaced iron pins. She was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Chen, moving survey markers is a criminal offense." "I'm aware. Class D felony. But I'm giving them one more chance to fix this before I file a criminal complaint." "That's generous of you." "I'm not generous, I'm practical. If they remove their encroachments and acknowledge the correct boundary, this ends. If they keep pushing, I'll push back harder." 2 days later, I got a letter from a law firm in Jackson. Douglas had hired an attorney. The letter was full of legal language about disputed boundaries and good faith improvements and potential adverse possession claims. It also included a settlement offer. The HOA would pay me $15,000 for the disputed 3 acres, and we'd establish the fence line as the legal boundary going forward. $15,000 for 3 acres of land worth at least $100,000 in this market. They thought I was stupid. I wrote back to the attorney, "The boundary is not disputed. It is clearly established by recorded surveys dating to 1958. Your clients moved survey markers in an apparent attempt to steal my land. This is not a civil matter that can be settled with payment. This is a criminal matter. Remove all encroachments within 14 days, or I file a criminal complaint for tampering with survey markers and begin civil proceedings for trespass and boundary restoration. Robert Chen, I didn't copy Douglas. I sent it directly to his attorney, who would have to explain to his client that they were legally wrong and potentially criminally liable. The Riverbend Estates HOA called an emergency meeting. I know because 3 different homeowners contacted me asking what was going on. They'd received violation notices from the county about setback violations, and they wanted to understand why. I met with 2 of them at a coffee shop in town. Sarah and Tom Mitchell, a couple in their 40s who'd bought one of the lots and built their dream retirement home. Their deck was the one that violated the setback. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said, "we had no idea about any property line issues. We built based on the survey the HOA gave us when we bought the lot. Did you get an independent survey?" "No. The HOA said theirs was sufficient." I pulled out a copy of my survey and showed them the true boundary line. Tom's face went pale. "Our deck is on your property?" "Part of it, yes. About 12 feet of it. What do you want us to do?" "I want the HOA to acknowledge the correct boundary and remove any encroachments. That might mean modifying your deck." "I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear." Sarah looked like she might cry. "We spent $40,000 on that deck. Then you need to talk to Douglas Kerr and the HOA board. They're the ones who gave you a false survey. They're the ones who moved my property markers. They created this problem." Tom's expression shifted from worry to anger. "They told us that survey was certified. It might have been certified at some point. But it doesn't match the county records or any historical survey. Someone altered the boundary." They left to talk to their lawyer. I stayed for another coffee, knowing what was coming. When you mess with people's property values and force them into expensive corrections, they stop being your allies. Douglas had thought he was protecting the HOA's interests by stealing my land. Instead, he'd created a mess that would cost HOA members tens of thousands of dollars. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning. I wasn't invited. I wasn't a member. But I was sitting in my truck across the street from the community center when the homeowners started arriving. 20 minutes into the meeting, my phone rang. It was Tom Mitchell. "Mr. Chen, could you come inside? The board is claiming you're making false accusations and that your survey is incorrect. We'd like to hear your side." I walked into the community center, 40-some people sitting in folding chairs. Douglas at the front, looking like a CEO about to handle a shareholder revolt. His eyes narrowed when he saw me. "This is a private HOA meeting," he said. "I invited him," Tom Mitchell said. "He's the property owner involved in the dispute. We deserve to hear from him directly." Several people nodded. Douglas looked like he wanted to refuse, but couldn't without looking worse. "Fine. Mr. Chen, you have 5 minutes." I walked to the front. Didn't bring notes. Didn't need them. "My name is Robert Chen. I own the 42-acre property west of this subdivision. In October, I discovered that someone had moved my property survey markers approximately 15 to 20 feet onto my land, effectively stealing 3 acres. I had a professional resurvey done by Walsh & Associates, the same firm that did my original 2007 survey. They confirmed that my markers were moved and that my legal boundary is exactly where the 1958 original survey established it. Several homes in this subdivision have improvements that violate county setback requirements if the correct boundary line is used. That's not my fault. That's the fault of whoever provided you with an incorrect survey and whoever moved my legal markers." I pulled out a folder. "I have here the original 1958 survey, my 2007 survey, the new 2024 certified survey, and photographs showing disturbed earth where my iron pins were moved. All of this is consistent. All of it is filed with the county. Anyone can verify it." Douglas stood up. "This is a vendetta because we wouldn't let you connect to our private road. I've never asked to connect to your road. I have my own access. This is about you moving my property markers to steal my land." A woman in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Chen, if we acknowledge the correct boundary line, what happens to the homes that violate setbacks?" "That's between you, the HOA, and the county. I didn't build those homes. I didn't give you the wrong survey. I'm simply defending my legal property boundary. What do you want from us?" "I want the HOA to acknowledge the legal boundary in writing. I want all encroachments removed. And I want assurance that no one will move my markers again." Douglas interrupted. "We're not admitting to any wrongdoing. Then I'll file criminal charges for tampering with survey markers on Monday morning. It's a Class D felony in Wyoming. The county has already been notified because of the setback violations. I've been patient. I've given you chances to fix this, but I'm not giving away 3 acres of my land to cover up your mistake." The room went silent. You could feel the mood shifting. These weren't corporate shareholders, they were homeowners who just realized their property values were about to take a hit because of Douglas's decisions. A man in the back stood up. "Douglas, did you move his markers?" "Aye. The HOA authorized a survey to clarify the boundary. Did you move his markers? Yes or no?" Douglas's face went red. "We established what we believe to be the correct boundary based on historical fence lines. Fence lines don't establish property boundaries," I said quietly. "Recorded surveys do. And you didn't establish anything. You moved iron pins that had been legally placed and recorded." Sarah Mitchell stood up. "I want to know who authorized this. Because now my husband and I are looking at potentially tearing down a deck we just built because the HOA gave us a wrong survey." 3 other homeowners stood up with similar concerns. Douglas tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was too late. He'd lost the room. Tom Mitchell spoke up. "I move that the HOA acknowledge Mr. Chen's legal boundary as established by certified surveys and county records." All in favor? The vote was overwhelming. Douglas voted against. He was the only one. The formal acknowledgement came 3 days later, signed by the HOA board, notarized, filed with the county. The legal boundary was exactly where my survey said it was. The violations were another matter. The county gave the affected homeowners 60 days to correct the setback violations or apply for variances. 2 families had to modify structures at significant cost. 1 family sued the HOA for providing inaccurate surveys. Douglas resigned as HOA president 2 weeks later. Officially, it was to pursue other opportunities. Actually, it was because 3 lawsuits had been filed against the HOA, and his homeowner's insurance didn't want him making any more decisions. I never filed criminal charges. Didn't need to. Douglas had been publicly humiliated, lost his position, and created enough legal problems for himself that the district attorney's office opened an investigation based on the county's complaint about the survey tampering. But I did do one more thing. I built a fence. A beautiful 6-foot cedar privacy fence exactly on my legal property line. I used a professional surveyor to mark every post location. I pulled all the permits. I did everything by the book. The fence runs the entire western boundary of my property. It's exactly where it should be, where it's always been legally. And it makes very clear that the 3 acres Douglas tried to steal are mine. Several of the Riverbend homeowners have since apologized. They understand they were caught in a mess created by their HOA president's overreach. Some have become good neighbors. Douglas sold his house in the subdivision last spring and moved to Colorado. I heard he's working in commercial real estate again. I hope you learned something about property law before he tries to redevelop anything else. The lesson in all this is pretty straightforward. Property boundaries aren't suggestions. They're legal facts established by surveys and recorded with the county. You can't change them by moving markers or building fences or claiming historical use. Douglas thought he could steal 3 acres of land by moving some iron pins and hoping I wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. He thought his position as HOA president gave him authority over property law. He was wrong on both counts. I noticed. I fought back. And I won not by being aggressive or angry, but by being patient, methodical, and absolutely correct about the law. Property surveying isn't complicated if you understand it. Boundaries are a matter of math, historical record, and legal documentation. It doesn't matter how much money you have or what title you hold. It matters what the survey says and what's filed with the county. I'm a civil engineer. I spent my career understanding exactly how this works. When Douglas moved my markers, he didn't pick a fight with some random neighbor who wouldn't know the difference. He picked a fight with someone who knew exactly where every boundary line was, down to the inch. Someone who understood survey law better than his lawyers. Someone who had the patience to let him make mistake after mistake while I documented everything. The fence stands now, exactly on my legal boundary. My horses graze on all 42 acres that I own and pay taxes on. And every time I look at that fence, I remember that the best way to win a property dispute is to be absolutely certain you're right before you start, and then let your opponent waste their energy being wrong. Douglas learned that lesson the expensive way. I already knew it.